Arman Tsarukyan just sent the lightweight division a very clear message, and Dan Hooker was the one who had to pay the price. This wasn't just another main event, this was Arman reminding everyone in the lightweight division who he is and why he is deserving of the next title shot. Coming into this fight, most people expected Arman to wrestle early, wrestle often, and never let Hooker settle. But even knowing that, stopping it is totally different. And Hooker has the tools, the length, the counter knees, the experience in difficult situations, but Arman isn't that type of fighter who doesn't give you enough time to figure him out. Now right from the start of the fight, Arman took control and command of his striking and pressure. He made sure that these things weren't reckless and that it was calculated. He did not give Hooker the chance to read on his moves and what was coming next to predict the outcomes. He used the jab to set up his kicks, he used the jab to set up the takedowns, and he went diving for his legs, dragged him across the octagon, and Hooker did try to frame him and create space, but ultimately it was too messy, and Arman's timing and balance was just better than Hooker's in this fight. Arman's game plan in this fight was very smart. He understood the threat of Dan Hooker on the feet, so he eliminated that by just pressuring him, getting him against the cage, and make sure that he could get the takedowns to get him off his feet and onto the ground. By using the threat of the takedowns, it allowed Arman to set up jabs and land them, set up kicks. When he clinched with Dan Hooker, it allowed him to land knees in the clinch, and ultimately Dan was just outmatched also in the striking. By having to deal with the heavy pressure of Arman Tsarukyan, you can see that Dan Hooker was trying to get something going, trying to establish a rhythm. However, because of the pressure from Arman, it just didn't allow him to set his feet down, throw strikes at Arman like he normally would. It just disrupted the entire rhythm of Dan Hooker, which favoured Arman Tsarukyan as it allowed him to land more strikes than Dan Hooker and allowed him to secure more takedowns, put his weight on top of Dan Hooker, and cause him to gas out quicker because of having to carry all that weight. Another thing that made Dan Hooker to gas out quicker in this fight was the attempted guillotines. He tried it twice in this fight and both failed, but you can see that he was trying to really get Arman, and Arman did a fantastic job of just swirling around and escaping the guillotines and just getting on top of him and dealing heavy blows on Dan Hooker and delivering heavy ground and pound. The second round opened and Dan Hooker throwed with more urgency, as he should, but Arman dialed in with another clean takedown, and this time Arman didn't want to control, he wanted to finish the fight. This was really good grappling as he advanced from half guard then to side control, and you can see that Dan's body language was starting to shift and Arman started applying shoulder pressure, making Dan Hooker uncomfortable, forcing him to react and ending up in the arm triangle choke. Now what this performance tells us is that Arman Tsarukyan still has it. He hasn't fought in over a year, and he showed us that he still has great composure, control, fight IQ and fighting instincts to finish the fight. He showed us that he has his elite wrestling, fast clean entries, smart pressure, has improved his striking a lot more, and he has no more wasted movements, and he doesn't brawl, overextend and fights with good clean intentions. Now what does this mean for Arman's career? Well, after the fight, Arman Tsarukyan called out Ilia Topuria, and rightfully so. He is the #1 contender in the lightweight division, so this fight really does make sense, and this fight that he just had with Dan Hooker really puts him back into the title picture. He was already in the rankings, and now this victory has made a statement, the kind that the UFC has to pay attention to, as this performance really earns the title shot, at very best maybe just one fight away. Now we do know that the UFC and Arman aren't really in the best of terms with each other, since Arman did pull out of the fight in January 2025 against Islam Makhachev, and it was 1 day's notice when he pulled out, which was pretty bad. So the UFC doesn't really want to do Arman any favours, and rightfully so. He did cause him a lot of problems on that fight at the beginning of the year. However, that being said, the fight to make in the lightweight division is Ilia Topuria against Arman Tsarukyan. Both guys are young, both guys are hungry, and both guys have what it takes to make it a really entertaining fight. Arman comes from that heavy wrestling style, and he likes to pressure his opponents so that he can get a submission later in the rounds, whereas Ilia does come from a wrestling and grappling background but has now become more of a striker, prioritizing his boxing. When compared to the other contenders in the division, the likes of Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett do not make any sense, as all of them are not on the same level as Arman Tsarukyan, hence why it wouldn't really be a competitive fight for any of them against Ilia Topuria, hence why Arman Tsarukyan is the best choice out of all the other contenders against Ilia Topuria, which should happen next year. However, for the last year, Ilia Topuria has been avoiding Arman Tsarukyan. Arman has been calling out Ilia Topuria non-stop throughout the whole year, making memes about it. But Ilia Topuria just doesn't want to fight him, as Ilia Topuria has bigger plans. He wants to fight Islam Makhachev, and he also wants to do a money fight with Paddy Pimblett. Ilia Topuria is chasing the money fights and to build his legacy, hence why he doesn't really want to fight Arman Tsarukyan, as he doesn't really see him as a challenge or as a threat that can ruin his legacy. Now, that being said, as fight fans, we really want to see Arman Tsarukyan versus Ilia Topuria, as it will be the most competitive fight in the lightweight division against all the other competitors. However, the way Ilia Topuria is moving and the way the UFC will handle the situation probably will result in Arman Tsarukyan not fighting Ilia Topuria anytime soon. So if that is the case, some potential matchups for Arman Tsarukyan could be Charles Oliveira. They have had a fight before and it was quite close, so if Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan can happen again, and if Arman can win in dominant style, it could make the UFC try to make Ilia Topuria versus Arman, as it will make a good narrative to show that Arman has improved and he is now title worthy to fight Ilia Topuria. There's also Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje, Paddy Pimblett. Any one of those guys could get Arman to get his name up in the rankings. Even though he already is there, it would show us that the people in the rankings aren't on Arman's level, and he is just truly the #1 worthy contender. Amongst the other lightweight contenders, I do see Arman Tsarukyan winning in very dominant style, primarily due to submissions. However, if he does get the fight against Ilia Topuria, at the rate he is right now, I do see Ilia Topuria beating him via knockout. This is because when we see Arman Tsarukyan fighting similar opponents to Ilia Topuria, for example Charles Oliveira, the difference is there, as Arman's striking isn't as good as Ilia Topuria's and his wrestling isn't really as high level. Ilia Topuria was able to stop the grappling and wrestling of Charles Oliveira, whereas Charles Oliveira had him in a submission attempt and was quite close. Ilia Topuria also knocked him out in devastating fashion, whereas Arman Tsarukyan could not. However, there is still time for Arman to grow and develop, and he can push forward, and he could develop one day to have a high level fight with Ilia Topuria. But anyways, that's been the breakdown of this fight and the discussion of Arman's future steps. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Who do you want to see Arman Tsarukyan fight next? Make sure you like, subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.